Hello, I am back looking at another Best Books of the Year list, this time a much shorter one from the Washington Post, where they pick their top 10 books of 2024, which includes fiction and nonfiction, some books which I've read and others which I've been wanting to read, and some which have appeared on the lists from other publications, and some which I have not heard of before. So I'm going to go through these 10 books, give descriptions of each of them, and if I have any thoughts or feelings about them. But I would love to know, have you read any of these books? Do you agree with their choices? Are you interested in reading any of them now? Or are there any other books that you want to highlight as some of the top of 2024? Let me know in the comments below. First off, there is a novel which has been appearing on some other lists, which is Colored Television by Danzy, Senna. And this is a story about a biracial woman who's a writer who's just completed her second novel, but she's struggling to get it published. So to make ends meet and to make some money, she goes to Hollywood, where she gets a job writing on a sitcom about a biracial family. So it's about this conflict between the creation of high art and the creation of like popular culture, but also about the ways in which racial identity is discussed within the larger culture. Next up is James by Percival, Everett, which just recently won the National Book Award. I was so happy to see this after it had been shortlisted for the Booker and didn't win that prize. Hopefully it will still be nominated for even more book awards. But yeah, what an incredible novel, which is both a homage and a critique of Mark Twain's classic, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Taking the events from that story, but telling them from the perspective of the character of Jim, and doing so in a way which is so refreshing and new and moving and funny and powerful and heartbreaking. There is so many good things to say about this novel. And no, I don't think it's absolutely necessary to read Mark Twain's novel before reading this, but I would recommend it, or at least reading a summary of that classic book before getting to this newer one. Also, Percival Everett gave such an endearing speech when he won the National Book Award, so I'll put a link to that in the description below in case you haven't seen it. My Friends by Hisham, Matar, another novel that was listed for this year's Booker Prize and which has been appearing on some other lists, and which I agree is absolutely one of the best books of the year, especially in how this story represents some real historical events, some violent events of protests and mass shootings and killings, which I wasn't aware of before reading this story, but which actually occurred right here in London. And this story follows how two Libyan men get caught up in the protest and the consequences of that within the city of London, and following from one of these men's perspective in the many years that follow, and how he becomes exiled from his country and is caught in this kind of limbo state, and the way it examines his life and his relationship with national identity, and but also his love for reading and for art and for friendship, of the strong connections of friendship and with family that he has had to leave behind. It is so beautifully written, but also really powerful in portraying this story about history and culture and the fate of individuals caught up in the crossfire. Also in this UK edition, there's a map shown on the inside cover, which is actually on the front cover of the US edition. Playground by Richard Powers, a novel which is very much about climate change and capitalism and the rise of AI. And it follows a number of disparate individuals who congregate on an island in the South Pacific, and following their different fates, but also this story is very tricksy, and there were definitely some sections of this book that I enjoyed more than others, but I was so glad that I read it all the way to the end, because there are some twists to this story that I really wasn't anticipating, and which I struggled to even understand. I had to reread the end of this book multiple times before I felt like I got a real handle on the story and the very creative thing that the author does with this novel. So I think it is very impassioned and very impactful in many different ways. I don't know if I would classify it as one of my absolute top books of the year, but I read it with my online book club, and we had some fascinating discussions about it, especially about that ending. This Strange Eventful History by Claire Messud, which is a novel that I found incredibly impactful and made me reflect upon my own family history and heritage in the way it follows multiple generations of a French-Algerian family from World War II up until the recent present. And something I enjoyed so much about this novel is how there's a book within a book of the story of one of the members of this family has been creating this book for a long period of time, but wasn't able to get it published and hasn't done anything with it. It's just sort of sat in a drawer, and it makes me think about how there are all these stories of our family history and past, and the creative lives of people from past generations, which often we just don't know anything about, because often things like books they may have written just don't get passed down, and we aren't aware of them. And it makes me think much larger way about how there are so many aspects of life of people from the past that we don't realize about. And so the way it follows these different family members, it kind of follows pockets of their story and kind of hopscotches throughout history to tell these different moments of time from their stories and how they live and work across the entire world. It's really epic in its scope, but looking at just these little particular moments of their stories. Next is a nonfiction book called The Hidden Globe: How Wealth Hacks the World, which examines the way in which companies and extremely wealthy individuals are able to manipulate the system and laws to transfer wealth around the world and use the mechanics of capitalism to retain and grow their wealth to unimaginable extents. And in doing so, it means that the majority of the population is stuck in place. So this would be an absolutely fascinating book to read alongside Richard Powers' novel Playground, because he is looking at a lot of the same things within the story of his book. So I'd not heard of this before, but I'd really like to read it now. I Heard Her Call My Name, a memoir of transition by Lucy Sante. I'd not heard of this nonfiction book before, but it sounds so moving, where the author describes her experiences throughout her life as a trans woman and her process of transitioning in the year 2021, but also looking at her work as a critic and her creative life. And they say that this book is very funny and a joy to read. Question 7 by Richard Flanagan. This is a nonfiction book I've been really wanting to get to, and just recently it won the Baillie Gifford Prize, which is the biggest book award for nonfiction in the UK. And I think Flanagan is the only author to have won both the Baillie Gifford and the Booker Prize for a previous novel of his. And this book is both a memoir and a collection of essays, which is looking at the author's life and the author's family history between Tasmania and Japan, but also looking at different cultural and scientific moments of progress from history. V13, Chronicle of a Trial by Emmanuel Noel Carrere and translated by John Lambert. Now, in 2015, there were a series of coordinated terrorist attacks in Paris, which led to the deaths of 130 people and wounded many more besides. And in 2021, a trial was held for some of the people responsible for these terrorist attacks. And the author, Carrere, attended these trials. And so these are his accounts of the trials, the observations he made about the nature of good and evil he saw at play, and also the larger politics that were at work, and what this says about the larger world today. And finally, there is the nonfiction book, When the Clock Broke, with the subtitle Conmen, Conspiracists, and How America Cracked Up in the Early 1990s by John Ganz. This is a deep dive into the 1992 presidential election and how some candidates and people involved in that election made it much more about spectacle and about scandal than about political dialogue, and how this very much set the blueprint for politics and elections over the next few decades, and how we can very much see the result of this today. This was also on Obama's summer reading list. It's a book I've been meaning to read, and it sounds incredibly relevant and important, and one that I'm hoping to get to. So those are the 10 books on the Washington Post list. Obviously, I'd highly recommend these 2 books, but there are other titles that I also want to explore. And like I said, let me know in the comments below if you've read any of these books, or if you're keen to read any of them now, or let me know about any other of your top books of 2024. But I hope you have a great week, and I will speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.